Welcome, and thank you for joining me tonight. Find a comfortable position, let the day slowly fade away, and allow yourself to simply listen. There is nothing you need to do, nowhere you need to be, and nothing expected of you except to relax. As our story unfolds, you can follow every detail, or simply let the sound of my voice carry you gently towards sleep. Now let's begin. Imagine untouched places, vast valleys carved by ancient glaciers, forests teeming with life. They whisper of a wildness we're rapidly losing. But how did these landscapes, so vital to our nation's spirit, come under threat? And what would it take to save them? The late 1800s, an era of relentless expansion. Railroads sliced across continents, cities exploded with industry, and natural resources, timber, minerals, wildlife, were seen as commodities to be exploited. It was a time when the pursuit of progress seemed to justify any cost. But that cost? The destruction of something irreplaceable. Then there was Theodore Roosevelt, a name synonymous with ruggedness and action, but behind that public image lay a man wrestling with profound loss. His mother and wife, both gone within days of each other, left him adrift in a world of privilege and grief. How could he find purpose beyond New York society? Roosevelt's early political career began in Albany as a New York State assemblyman. He was a reformer, fighting corruption and championing the people, which earned him powerful enemies. His focus then wasn't on wildlands or endangered species, it was squarely on cleaning up city politics. A hunting trip to the Dakotas changed everything. Surrounded by vast prairies and abundant wildlife, Roosevelt began to see animals not as targets or commodities, but vital parts of a delicate ecosystem. Could he reconcile his love for the hunt with a growing respect for nature's intrinsic value? Then came 1893, the panic. Banks failed, businesses collapsed, and unemployment soared. It exposed the dark side of unchecked capitalism, the vulnerability of a system driven solely by profit. Suddenly, Roosevelt started questioning everything he thought he knew about power and responsibility. Roosevelt's election as governor of New York gave him a powerful platform, and he wasn't afraid to use it, taking on the railroad barons who controlled the state. He fought them tooth and nail, earning national attention and the ire of party bosses. But was this confrontation a political suicide note? The Spanish-American War erupted, and Roosevelt saw his chance, not just to serve his country but to prove himself on the world stage. He'd always believed in American expansionism. Now he was eager to put that belief into action. But what would this conflict reveal about his character and ambitions? Charge! Roosevelt's bravery at San Juan Hill catapulted him to national hero status, instantly recognizable, celebrated across the country. It cemented his political power, but also made him a target for those who feared his rising influence. Was this newfound fame a blessing or a burden? Returning home a war hero, Roosevelt found himself unexpectedly elevated to the vice presidency under William McKinley. It was a seemingly powerless position, but Roosevelt had plans. How would he use this platform, however limited, to push his agenda and shape the future of America? The news hit like a thunderclap. President McKinley was gone, assassinated in Buffalo. Suddenly, Theodore Roosevelt, a man known more for his boxing gloves than political power, found himself unexpectedly thrust into the nation's highest office. It was an unbelievable turn of events. An unprecedented opportunity, really. He'd long championed a vision for America, one where progress and preservation walked hand in hand, and now he had the platform to finally do something about it. Roosevelt's early conservation efforts didn't start with national parks, though. They began with something more practical: forest reserves. He believed that responsible management, careful planning, could balance what people needed from the land and protect it for future generations. It wasn't about stopping development entirely, but making sure it happened sustainably. But how do you convince loggers, ranchers, and miners to buy into a system they'd never seen before? Then there was John Muir, a fiercely passionate advocate who believed wild places should be protected for their own intrinsic value, untouched by human hands. He set his sights on Yosemite Valley and the Hetch Hetchy Reservoir, a potential water source for San Francisco. But damming Hetch Hetchy meant flooding a stunning valley, and that's where the conflict began. Preservation versus progress. Pinchot, now head of the U.S. Forest Service, championed a different approach, a utilitarian one. He believed forests were best managed for sustainable timber harvesting, creating jobs and boosting the economy. It was about finding the most benefit for the most people, which sharply clashed with Muir's vision of no logging, no development, just wilderness preserved in its natural state. A fundamental disagreement over what conservation really meant. Roosevelt's administration established dozens of national forests, a huge step forward for conservation. But it wasn't without controversy. Ranchers and miners resented restrictions on their land use, feeling the government was overreaching. How do you balance the needs of a growing nation with the desire to protect its natural heritage? It became a constant tug of war. The Brown v. United States case brought everything to a head. Timber companies, frustrated by Roosevelt's restrictions on logging, challenged his authority in court. Could the president really tell them what they could and couldn't do with their land? The Supreme Court would ultimately decide whether Roosevelt's vision of conservation was legal or just an overreach of power. Roosevelt's square deal wasn't just about business or labor. Conservation was a vital piece too. It was about fairness, balance, ensuring everyone got a chance while protecting the environment for future generations. He believed that unchecked greed would destroy both industry and nature, a radical idea at the time. Then came the 1904 coal strike. Miners demanded better wages and safer working conditions, while the coal operators refused to negotiate. Suddenly, the nation's supply of fuel was at risk, throwing industries into chaos. It highlighted how deeply intertwined natural resources, labor disputes, and government intervention really were. Roosevelt's decision to intervene, to mediate between miners and operators, was unprecedented. He summoned both sides to Washington, D.C., forcing them to compromise. It set a crucial precedent. The government had a responsibility to regulate industries reliant on natural resources. This alarmed many conservatives who believed in minimal government involvement. To ensure water reached the arid West, Roosevelt championed the creation of the Bureau of Reclamation, a bold plan to harness nature's power for agriculture. But could such large-scale engineering truly coexist with environmental protection? It was a question that would shape the future of the American West and test the very definition of conservation. The scale of Yellowstone was truly overwhelming. Roosevelt, riding through geyser basins and across vast meadows, witnessed firsthand what he felt responsible for protecting. He saw herds of bison grazing where they'd nearly vanished just decades before. A fragile victory indeed. It wasn't enough to simply declare these lands national parks. Active management and careful consideration were essential. This journey cemented his understanding. Conservation wasn't about preserving wilderness untouched, but guiding its recovery. Imagine a president simply setting aside land for its historical or geological significance. It sounds almost unbelievable today. In 1906, the Antiquities Act made that possible. This law gave Roosevelt unprecedented power. He could declare national monuments without congressional approval. Suddenly, places like Devil's Tower and Grand Canyon were under federal protection. But this wasn't universally welcomed. It opened a door to conflict. The lumber barons and mining companies weren't thrilled, that much is certain. Roosevelt's policies felt like an attack on their livelihoods, what they believed was their right to exploit America's resources. They argued restricting access stifled economic progress, and they were powerful. They had money and influence, enough to start pushing back hard. Devil's Tower, an imposing monolith rising straight from Wyoming's plains. Roosevelt designated it as a national monument in 1906. It was a showcase of what the Antiquities Act could achieve, safeguarding something truly unique. But this act also stirred resentment. How far did federal authority really extend? Was it right for Washington to dictate what happened on someone else's land? As his second term drew to a close, Roosevelt wrestled with a profound question. What would be his legacy? He championed conservation like no president before him. But could these protections truly last? Could he strike that delicate balance, encouraging economic growth while preserving America's natural heritage for generations to come? William Howard Taft stepped into the presidency, eager to carry on Roosevelt's work. Initially, he seemed determined to uphold those conservation efforts, appointing Gifford Pinchot as head of the Forest Service, a clear signal of continuity. For a while, it looked like progress would continue uninterrupted, but the pressure was relentless. Powerful interests, those same lumber and mining companies, kept their influence alive, and slowly, quietly, protections began to erode. National forests, once carefully managed, saw timber rights loosened, opening them up for exploitation. How long could Taft resist that kind of force? Then came the Pinchot-Ballinger controversy, a full-blown crisis tearing through the Republican Party. Pinchot, fiercely dedicated to conservation, accused Secretary of the Interior Richard Ballinger of shady dealings regarding timber rights in Alaska. Suddenly, Taft's commitment to Roosevelt's policies was under intense scrutiny. Roosevelt, hearing about this unfolding drama from Europe, couldn't stay silent. He publicly denounced Ballinger's actions, an unprecedented attack on a member of his own party. The rift with Taft was now undeniable. The public debate around conservation reignited with ferocious intensity. Newspaper headlines screamed about commercial exploitation within national monuments, Grand Canyon, Yellowstone, places Roosevelt had fought so hard to protect. It was a stark reminder. Even the strongest protections could be compromised without constant vigilance. Were his efforts truly sustainable, or would these precious landscapes ultimately succumb to short-sighted greed? You'd think safeguarding America's wild places would be universally popular, but it wasn't. Even as Roosevelt championed national parks, powerful interests worked against him, and they weren't shy about explaining why. Lumber barons and mining tycoons saw conservation as an attack on their profits, arguing that protecting these lands stifled economic growth.
What?
That's a tough argument to beat. Could the promise of preservation really be undone by greed? The breaking point arrived with the Ballinger-Pinchot affair. Gifford Pinchot, Roosevelt's head forester, accused Secretary of Interior Richard Ballinger of selling off Alaskan coal lands to private interests, a direct betrayal of conservation principles. It was a bitter fight, fueled by ambition and ideology. When Pinchot publicly criticized Ballinger, Roosevelt had no choice but to dismiss him. That's when it became clear. Political power could easily trump environmental protection. The problem wasn't just high-level politics. It was happening on the ground. Reports surfaced, revealing illegal logging and mining operations within national monuments. Documents showed how loopholes in existing laws were being exploited to strip these protected areas of their resources. Someone was actively profiting from the very places Roosevelt had fought so hard to save. How could he protect something when people found ways around the rules? Furious at what he saw as a betrayal of his legacy, Roosevelt decided on an unprecedented act, running for president again, this time on a third-party ticket. It was an enormous gamble. Challenging Taft head-on would fracture the Republican Party and ignite a political firestorm. But could he single-handedly reverse the course of conservation? New nationalism, Roosevelt's platform for his third-party bid, put conservation front and center. It called for expanded national parks, stricter environmental regulations, a sweeping agenda designed to reclaim what had been lost. Suddenly, the 1912 election wasn't just about who would lead the country. It was a referendum on whether America valued its natural heritage. Could voters decide the fate of wild places? Despite Roosevelt's powerful message and a surprisingly strong showing, he won over 27% of the vote. Woodrow Wilson ultimately prevailed. It was a setback for conservationists, but not a defeat. Roosevelt's campaign awakened a national conversation about environmental protection, proving its appeal resonated across party lines. But could progress be achieved without presidential support? Wilson's administration wasn't initially focused on conservation like Roosevelt's had been, but public pressure, fueled by grassroots movements and citizen action, eventually forced him to recognize the importance of natural resources and enact some reforms. It showed that even without a champion in the White House, ordinary people could make a difference. Was this how change would happen? The creation of Shenandoah National Park in 1924 marked a shift. It wasn't without controversy. Local residents were displaced to make way for the park, but it demonstrated a new approach: direct land acquisition and recreational development. Was this how national parks would evolve, balancing preservation with public enjoyment? Over the decades, more parks were added: Acadia, Glacier, Olympic. The national park system expanded, a testament to perseverance and a growing understanding of America's natural heritage. But even with these successes, challenges remained: pollution, development pressures, and the constant struggle to balance human needs with ecological integrity. What will future generations do to protect what remains? Roosevelt's legacy wasn't just about establishing parks, it was about inspiring a movement. A generation of conservationists and environmental activists built upon his work, continuing the fight for wildlands long after he left office. His actions sparked a ripple effect that continues to shape our relationship with the natural world today. What will be our legacy? Glaciers are receding faster than ever before. Wildfires rage across landscapes that Roosevelt fought to protect. Can these iconic places, symbols of American identity, really survive? The reality is stark. Climate change isn't some distant threat. It's actively reshaping our national parks right now. Rising temperatures are stressing ecosystems, pushing species toward extinction, and transforming familiar vistas into something almost unrecognizable. It's a challenge Roosevelt couldn't have foreseen, but one that underscores the urgent need to adapt, to rethink how we manage these precious lands for generations to come. But it's not all bleak. Looking at current conservation efforts reveals echoes of Roosevelt's original vision. The concept of balancing human needs with environmental preservation, it remains central to how we manage our parks today. You see it in initiatives like prescribed burns, intentionally setting controlled fires to reduce wildfire risk, just as Roosevelt advocated for managing forests, and in collaborative agreements between park services and local communities. When he established Yellowstone, he understood that cooperation was key, so when the challenges of climate change arise, these principles offer a roadmap forward. Roosevelt dreamed of an America where wild places thrived, a legacy etched in stone and timber. But did he truly create a system that could endure? Or was his work merely a temporary reprieve, a pause before the inevitable pressures of human ambition and environmental change? The answer isn't simple. What's clear is that his commitment to conservation continues to inspire, a constant reminder that safeguarding our natural heritage demands vigilance, adaptation, and an unwavering belief in the power of protecting what truly matters.